I am delighted to welcome Ian Houston from Washington over in the States, which is the main reason we're not having our coffee break in the morning this month. I thought it was a bit mean to ask Ian to wake up in the middle of the night just to speak to us. So he kindly sat us a time of, I think it's 9 o'clock with you, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Much more habitable hour than I think the 3 a.m. or something it would have been. So yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to 2021. Not the start we thought we'd be having, but we're all still trucking along. So the format of this coffee break today will be essentially me asking Ian some leading questions and letting him chat as much as he feels necessary about the different topics. We are going to concentrate on the new presidential administration that's going to come in a week's time. We will talk about a couple of other topics as well, but that's going to be the main focus. I would also ask that if anyone has any questions, to send them directly to me in the chat function. I'd be delighted to collate them, and hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes at the end to put them to Ian. And if you'd like to do that yourself, then that's absolutely a possibility. That's one of the reasons we've got everyone's on the screen like this, so you can all see each other as much as you would like to. So to take it away, I'll give a very brief introduction of who this lovely gentleman in the glasses looking at me is. So this is Ian Houston. He is a Scottish-American consultant who likes to concentrate on looking after people who are less fortunate. He's worked in the Congress on policy issues and has studied international relations at the University of Kent. And he has, I mean, I'm not going to go through everything that he's accomplished in his life, but he is very much would like to look after people and make sure that they have the best opportunities in life possible. Is that about right, Ian?
That's fantastic. I love that end. That very much is a driver. I think I fall short of that goal, but certainly that is absolutely a goal. So
Important to have goals.
thank you for phrasing it in that way. I may use that. I'll go back and listen to the recording.
No problem at all. You can take it. So to start off with, I just wanted to acknowledge the strange time we're in, not only in a global pandemic, but the events of the last week. I don't want to concentrate on it too much, but I just wanted to kind of get your take on it as you're in Washington. What's it been like in the last week with you?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me start by saying thank you. I see so many friends here as a part of the conversation. I really see this as a chat, and so I welcome the comments that may come forward. So thank you everyone for joining us and for being here. Thank you to the London Scottish House for the fantastic work that you do. The entire staff, just being a social enterprise and a hub and a museum, and the cultural activities that you do, and sparking these creative connections across networks, the third sector being so very important. So thank you for London Scottish House for what you do. I sometimes like to just pause and really say that directly to people. You make a difference, and I know it's been a difficult situation for the House and for members, but let's just press forward. Things will get better, and so appreciate the opportunity of speaking with you. Washington, yes, the last week or so has been challenging. And for me personally, it was challenging. When I saw the images of the insurrection and the riots and the storming of the Capitol building, where I had worked for many years and actually spent much time there, not just professionally, but with my family. The area around the Capitol is like a park setting, very pleasant, lots of grounds to walk around, trees. So for me, it was a very a personal thing, and almost feeling personally violated. Um, but Letty, as I look at what happened, I've written about how I feel these events, as troubling as they are, I can simply make a choice of how I wish to react to them. And so I will continue to look for ways to support people and other people who share my values of um, doing good things and serving other people, and stay focused on making these connections between Scotland, the Scottish people, Scottish entities, Scottish enterprise, with the United States, and people who have a great love for Scotland and a desire to make those connections. So I see 2021 as a positive moment, a critical moment for Scotland and for the United States. The events that have happened over the last week have, in my view, overshadowed what is going to be a remarkable inaugural event on January 20th that will usher in a new era, will allow us to turn a page and move forward. There will be quite historic moments while we've been focused on, rightfully so, on President Biden and his inauguration. We also need to remember that Vice President Kamala Harris will also be inaugurated on that day. That's a historic triumph, in my view, of democracy, of the first woman vice president to be elected and to be sworn in, and also the first African American and Indian American woman to be sworn in as vice president. That's a remarkable reflection of a democracy that is healthy, that is vibrant, that is producing individuals like Kamala Harris that can come forward and make history. So while the events are troubling, that what we're seeing, and really individuals who have been involved need to be held accountable for the actions of what they have brought forward. We also need to recognize the sun is shining. Literally, right now, as I look out my window, the sun is shining. But metaphorically, we have a new era and we have new leadership, and that will be an opportunity for Scotland and the United States. I want to keep going, but I also want to be pause here, Letty, in case you had a follow-up question, but I do have some other comments related to the US-Scottish relationship.
Yeah, well, we can come on to that. I want to kind of set the tone of Scotland's relationship with the US in kind of history. It's not just in the heritage and the ancestry of people like yourselves who are living Americans, but it's also it goes a lot deeper than that. Do you want to just, I mean, we could spend a whole hour just talking about that, but just kind of a light brushstroke on to cover that a little bit, so that we can then delve a little bit deeper into the present.
Yes, that's a very good question, because I think often when we think of relationships between nations, in this case between the United States and Scotland, that often it's through the lens of a political relationship. That is, the assessment from a foreign policy standpoint or international relations is done through how are the political leaders getting on, or what is their relationship. And that is one layer, of course, one important layer of any relationship between countries and nations. But it's so multifaceted. I think the relationship between Scotland and the United States has many layers. It has the cultural, the business, the university and academia, the research pieces of it, art. It has so many layers that go back for centuries, but it is also a modern relationship. And what I've really tried to instill as I've spoken with US audiences is Scotland and the United States have a modern relationship. And it's very important for the United States to understand that Scotland is a place that we need to revere the history of Scotland, the castles and the of Mary Queen of Scots and Robert the Bruce and William Wallace. It's all there, and it's something we should celebrate, and we need to preserve that history. But we also need to recognize that Scotland is a progressive, entrepreneurial, modern society that is producing modern art and exciting innovation, whatever the sectors may be. And it's so very important for US audiences, US government officials, US universities, students, to understand that dynamic. It's an exciting time for Scotland, even though this is a unique moment with this current situation with the pandemic. Scotland is vibrant. And that's, as we think of the history and the relationship, I want to sort of use this new opportunity with the Biden administration come in to instill that thought, to really get policy leaders in the United States to understand that modern Scotland and all that it has to offer.
And on that note, what is the current situation with the Trump administration, with US and Scottish and UK politics in a kind of a broad sense?
Well, specifically right now, on a broader level, I think that the relationship has always been on a political level, has been a strong relationship, and that continues. On the table right now, to narrow it down a bit more, the UK-US trade negotiations have been moving forward. It is believed about 2/3 of that overall agreement has been put in place. So a lot of heavy lifting has been done related to that specific agreement, which is still not done. And I think, though, that based on what happened with Brexit, of course, the UK was very aggressive in trying to forge specific trading relationships and agreements with certain countries, and the US was a real priority and goal. And so that had moved forward considerably, as I say, about 2/3 of it done, but it's not done. So one of the questions will be, what does a new administration do with that negotiation? How does it move forward? But I would say yes. I mean, always the relationship between right now the UK and the US is a favorable one. But there are also complex personalities in the mix, Lettie, as you know. I think we need to be honest about that. That certain politicians do things in certain ways that can perhaps sour the relationship or benefit the relationship. But individual characters within the relationship do drive it. And so we've had some interesting characters of late that have been part of the relationship between the UK and the US.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to be in Washington a couple of years ago and met some of the diplomats in Washington from the Scotland office.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what they've been able to achieve in the last few years?
Yes, that's a great question. The Scottish office, everyone here in the UK embassy, fantastic. 10 out of 10, maybe 11 out of 10. They do such fantastic work, led by Joni Smith. Joni Smith is been quite innovative. In my view, she has really set a precedent of how that office should operate. And she has great support from Rory Headley, who is the second counselor within the office, and then a couple of other members of staff. In terms of what they do, they're engaging with the Scottish Business Network, Scottish Development International, National Trust of Scotland USA, Entrepreneurial Scotland, which has a presence here, all the various groups that are really moving towards drawing attention to Scotland and what Scotland has to offer. So forging partnerships across the board, cultural, artistic, representing Scotland in a very effective way. And so Joni has been doing that now for a few years. She's really been fantastic in that role. and Rory as well. So yeah, they work within, technically they work within the embassy itself. And to draw a distinction, of course, between Ireland. Ireland has its own embassy and its own ambassador, and Scotland, of course, works within the UK embassy, as do Northern Ireland and Wales. They also have similar offices within the embassy.
Brilliant. I apologise, the kettle's on. So if you can hear that in the background, I apologise for that. I'm getting a cup of tea, I believe. So my next question is another one to set a bit of background, but who and what would you say has influenced President-elect Biden's worldview? You know, we're able to look at him in a slightly different kind of vein, I suppose, because he has been vice president recently.
Yeah.
So we've got that kind of modern aspect that we can have a look at that as well.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I think it's important for the audience here to recognize and remember that Vice President Biden, soon to be President Biden, was also Chairman Biden. And by that, I mean he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and did a very effective job in a bipartisan way in managing that committee. He was also a member of the committee, of course. And when he first came to the committee, he had, Lettie, as we can understand from where he is in terms of his age, very influenced by the post-World War II era and the role of the United States around the world and in Europe specifically. That had a great influence on him, as it did many of that era in the United States in terms of how they saw the role of the United States in the world was based on the experience of World War II and the aftermath of the Marshall Plan and rebuilding Europe, or being a part of the institutions that were growing out of the war. And so he's very much a product of that. But I would mention one specific individual that many people haven't spoken about so much as it relates to those who influence his foreign policy views. And it harkens back to a hero of mine back in San Francisco. I grew up in the San Francisco area. My dad came from Glasgow. My mom came from Leamington Spa, and they ended up in San Francisco, which is where I grew up. And there was a member of Congress that represented San Francisco. His name was Tom Lantos. Tom Lantos was a survivor of the Holocaust, who came from Hungary, who became an academic, ended up in San Francisco. And then he found a job in Washington, working for a new senator, freshly elected. His name was Joe Biden. Tom Lantos was a foreign policy thinker, an economic academic who had a global view, very much shaped by the Holocaust and World War II. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was in a labor camp, so quite remarkable story that he had. But he worked for Joe Biden. And Tom Lantos, who was a hero of mine, really shaped Senator Biden's views of the world. And they had a close friendship, so close that when Senator Biden was married to Dr. Jill Biden, they ended up taking their honeymoon to Hungary. And why did they go to Hungary? Because of Tom Lantos. And who went with them? Tom Lantos. He literally went there as part of their honeymoon. So he's a very close friend of Biden and had a significant influence on him. I think when the biographies are written of Biden, Tom Lantos will be a prominent character. And just so everyone knows, Lantos was elected a member of Congress, to great esteem and respect, ended up being the chair of the Foreign Affairs, Foreign Relations Committee in the House. And so a very respected member who had a great influence on Biden. in addition, as I say, to the events that were going on in the 50s and 60s, had a great influence on Biden early on when it came to foreign policy.
Brilliant. And so a very global view on the world as well as just home policy.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very, because of that Senate Foreign Relations assignment, it really forced him as an individual who didn't have a whole lot of background when it came to foreign affairs. It's a bit like members of parliament who are put on certain committees who may not have a background on any particular issue, but they're on that committee. It's a forcing mechanism that pushes them to learn an issue based on a committee assignment. And that's what happened for Biden. And there are many examples in the Senate like that. I remind everyone that another member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that Biden came to know was a person named Barack Obama. Barack Obama, one of his important committee assignments was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and one of his mentors was Chairman Biden. And another great luminary that some may remember, Senator Richard Lugar, who came from Indiana, who was a great foreign policy leader, a Republican, who knew Obama as well and knew Biden as well. And then lastly, another person who came from that committee, that same group, was Senator John Kerry, who also became chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and also, of course, Secretary of State. So that committee, I think, historically, when we go back and write the history books, and as I say, the biographies, that group of Lugar and Kerry and Biden and Obama, they were all serving on the committee at the same time. And so they really had a great influence over one another. And as I say, staff members made a difference. I would also say that the new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, to be the new Secretary of State, where did he come from? He was the staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That's where he worked. That's where he came to know Senator Biden, Vice President Biden, soon to be President Biden. They came from that committee. So Tony Blinken, the new Secretary of State to be, also came from that committee.
You've led me nicely into my next question, which is the players around Biden and Harris, and what their kind of influences are and how they are set to kind of help to influence not just foreign policy as a whole, but the relationship with the UK and Scotland, and how that might look.
Yes, I appreciate you. As I was saying with the inauguration, why it's so important for Vice President Harris, soon to be, that we put a wee bit of a spotlight on her, a big spotlight on her, because her role will be so very important. Her personal story is such a very uplifting story, and her own mother, coming from India and becoming an academic at Berkeley and receiving her PhD, had such a deep influence on Kamala Harris. So that global view started at a very young age for her. With India, she visited India as a young girl. She visited the Caribbean. Her father, who's still alive, who teaches at Stanford, was from the Caribbean. The parents met at Berkeley. So as a young child, she had a real global view, very much influenced, I think, by her mother. A little bit like President Obama was very influenced by his mother in terms of a global view. So in terms of them going forward, I think what we'll see with the Biden-Harris foreign policy agenda, it will be very focused more directly on the role of the United States when it comes to environmental issues, the role of the United States when it comes to human rights, humanitarian development issues, questions of diplomacy, bringing people together for dialogue within international institutions, such as the UN, such as NATO, such as the EU, and they will be very focused on rebuilding relationships, but I also think focusing in on issues that directly impact people and communities. And I appreciate you again raising Vice President Harris, because with COP26 around the corner now this year in November in Glasgow, I think she herself may very likely be there. We can certainly assume that Secretary Kerry will be there, but I think a real possibility that the Vice President will be there as well. So we need to be ready. We need to put the best foot forward of Scotland and what Scotland has to offer the world, and show policy leaders all the way up to the president and the vice president that Scotland is a wonderful place to visit, but it's so much more than that. It's so much deeper than that, and it's important for us to use global conferences such as the UN COP26 conference to showcase that and to plan for that now. Lettie, what I've written about, as you know, in my columns, is just this very point. I feel the United States has a friendly relationship with Scotland, but it's not where it needs to be in terms of the depth and the footprint that the United States officially has in Scotland. We, of course, have a fantastic embassy in London with great staff and foreign service and civil service and local hires. They're wonderful people, they're very talented. But we also have one person in Edinburgh, a foreign service officer, is very capable, she's very good, but we have one foreign service officer in Edinburgh. That's it. That's not, in my view, that's not where it needs to be. We need to have a greater presence, United States, a greater presence in Scotland, certainly based on what's happening within the UK right now. It's so critically important for the United States to have a deeper presence across Scotland, not just Edinburgh, but Glasgow, Aberdeen, Inverness, to really understand what's happening. And then conversely, Scotland needs to have officially a deeper presence within the United States, perhaps devoting more resources to the official government position of Scotland and disposition of Scotland in the United States. And I've been writing and speaking about this very point quite a bit.
Again, you've led me quite nicely into my next question, which is based around what the good people listening to you speak today can do to take advantage of the fact that we are now a week away from a new opportunity. You know, they're all here for a reason, and I'm sure that one of those reasons is going to be what's your advice on how do they start to take advantage of that and make sure that they are at the forefront of any kind of decisions, or making sure that they are known in America as much as they can be.
Yes, thank you. This is a moment. This is a key moment. It's a wave. Don't get caught up too much in the sentiment of negativity. Stay positive, stay optimistic. And this is a moment to be assertive and aggressive. And by that, I mean, it's building relationships. It's using social media platforms, particularly like LinkedIn, to make connections between people in the United States. For anyone in the United States who may be listening, to do the same thing for Scotland, because Scotland is so attractive to your business or what you may be wishing to do. So this is the moment to be doing that. When January 20th comes along, I can assure you that the sentiment right now, the clouds that are around Washington, not literally because we said it's a sunny day, but metaphorically, the clouds that are around will begin to dissipate. Right when the president takes that oath, there will be a shift and there will be a focus on the reality of a new era. And that will be an opportunity and a motivation for everyone not to wait for, as much as I will advocate for the Scottish government having a deeper footprint here in the United States, and as great as they are, the staff within the embassy, not to wait, but to lead. I see Graham on the chat here. He has some plans about engagement. He's already doing that with social media and Facebook and getting Scotland out there and building these relationships and doing it now. And so I really, all of us have an individual role that we can play. London's Scottish House, by the way, is, as I said at the beginning, doing fantastic work. And it's to continue to make these inroads with individuals in the United States to get the LSH brand in front of individuals in the United States who may know nothing about the model. And so this is the opportunity to do that. LSH has such an exciting model and a wonderful 2021, I think, ahead of it. But it needs to be, I think, mindful of this relationship with the United States, building relationships, building donors and supporters. And this is a moment, everyone. I feel very confident of that. We need to just step forward. We need to not be held back by the sentiment that we hear in the air right now of a democracy in tatters or violence in the streets. Even though that's a reality that we have to contend with, the United States still remains an opportunity, and this new era will present an open door. And again, for any US folks who are listening in, the same goes for Scotland. Engage with Scotland. Visit Scotland this year if circumstances allow, and certainly enjoy doing the many things that we can enjoy in Scotland, but also do business with Scotland. Scotland is a modern, progressive, exciting place that's very innovative, that it's doing things. Little Scotland, little wee Scotland is doing things for the world that show best practices of how governments can partner with local communities to address environmental issues, to address homelessness, to really invest in communities that show how it can be done, including in the United States. So Scotland is really an attractive place. And aside from the beauty of it, of visiting Scotland, and I hope people do get back to doing that, really engage with Scotland and you will be not disappointed. I guarantee you that. And so I don't know if we have anyone from the US who may be listening in, Lettie, but
if there are, please pop your hand up in the chat and we can name and shame you. So we've talked about the new administration as an opportunity, and there's two other, one definite opportunity, one potential, that are kind of in the pipeline at the moment. One is the dreaded Brexit, and how that might, how the relationship with the US and the UK will have changed because of Brexit, not just in terms of the trade, because we've talked about the kind of trade talks that are ongoing, but kind of the bigger picture. Is there anything that you'd like to say on that front?
Well, that's a really good question. The next iteration of Brexit may be directly related to Scotland, of course, as you can appreciate. The story it's not a closed book, in that the sentiment related to Brexit has footprints around whether the devolved nations are comfortable with what was decided. My colleague, Russell Dalgleish, who many of you will know, who's the chair of Scottish Business Network, he has a great interview that was in the Scotsman today. I encourage everyone to find that piece and that interview with Russell about starting businesses, how to do it, how to be entrepreneurial in this current reality that everyone is facing. But making a good observation, although many of us would have not been supportive of Brexit and may have literally voted against it, it is a reality. And that is something that we just digest, but we move forward in a positive way and we say, okay, this is a reality. Now let me move forward in the way that I think is best. So that's unfolding, of course. Often what I say, Lettie, on the question, I get it often, so what's going to happen with Scottish independence? And so I get that question a lot. The way that I choose to answer it is as a vehicle for talking about why it's important to understand how Scotland functions. The question they're asking is a political question, about whether or not Scotland, of course, would be politically independent. But it's important for investors, it's important for academics and businesses, researchers, to understand that Scotland is independent with a small I. And that you have to, when you look at the UK, you have to understand that the elements that comprise the UK, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, are independent entities, independent nations that have unique attributes, languages, cultures, history, ways of doing business, certain tax structures, certain health procedures, different university cultures. And it's important for investors and audiences to understand that while the political question of Scotland is something to be resolved, it's important to understand that Scotland is independent. It is a nation within the United Kingdom. And so as I try to answer that question, that's how I choose to go, because people, especially in negotiations, you mentioned Brexit, and we talked about the UK-US trade negotiation. Well, that's a bilateral negotiation between the UK and the US. And naturally, and that's an appropriate negotiation. But where do the individual devolved nations fit within that negotiation? Where does Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland fit within negotiation? It's important for the UK to very much listen to the voices in Scotland, to economic sectors and businesses, because it's unique. And if they don't listen, even though Secretary Truss has done a good job in trying to listen to the Scottish businesses, if the UK is not listening, then the US is not going to be aware that it can go directly to Scottish businesses to talk to Scottish leaders about what's happening with the Scottish economy. And in fact, of course, it can do that. And what Scottish Business Network has been trying to do is say, leaders at US government, would you like to hear from some Scottish leaders, business leaders? Here you go. And here's the space sector. Here's the environmental sector, green sector. Here are some leaders that you can hear from. And so we've tried to help that dialogue go forward, because within the UK structure, it's complex for the Scottish government to take that role in the context of the trade negotiation. So yeah, that's how I would respond to your question about Brexit. And it's important for us to just go forward recognizing that there is a certain amount of independence that already exists.
Yeah, and you took the words out of my mouth. As the next potential opportunity was independence with a capital I. So I think you've already covered that. But I do like the way that you've kind of talked about all of the UK nations being already independent with a small I, and actually the best way that Scottish businesses and enterprises can prepare for the unknown is just to do it now. And you've said that with taking advantage of the US opportunity is just start now rather than waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, and I see as I look at some of the individuals and friends here in the chat, Gavin is doing such fantastic work in the United States, has been doing it for some time, but I think he would agree that this is a real moment to uh, put the pedal to the metal, so to speak, and he will recognize that this is a new opportunity. But Gavin has a history of engagement with the U.S. And then I also see Richard and Kay on here who are doing just fantastic programming. They do just listen to their podcasts. They're just very uplifting and but if we can collectively come together and just make our individual contributions, say podcast about the U.S.-Scottish relationship, Gavin having an opportunity to talk about what he's doing in the United States or wants to be doing, and then Graham, I mentioned Graham and what he's doing with the diaspora and drawing attention to Scottish businesses, sometimes small businesses. We all play a role and we can all contribute. London Scottish House, we're having this chat, and I think has a lot of potential to make a contribution in furthering this relationship when, like inviting members of the embassy, when new officials are appointed to the US Embassy in London, inviting them over to the Scottish House for an event or engaging with them. And so all of us play a role in building relationships. And Scotland as a brand, just if we think broadly as a brand, if we think of the Saltire of the Scotland, is so favorably received. And we're just on the edges of speaking about burns for the burn sufferers at the end of this month. But let's remember that the inauguration and the birth of Burns are very close together, right? It's a nice coincidence. Burns himself, I think, would say that, yes, thank you for celebrating me, but he would deflect a little bit and say, don't celebrate me so much because I wrote about what was happening in modern Scotland. I was like a rebel then in the late 1700s. And you can celebrate me and have a nice supper. And that's great. Bring friends together. And we don't want to forget old acquaintances. We don't want to forget. And so he would be an advocate for that. But he would also say, don't celebrate me at the expense of talking about modern Scotland. So what we all need to do, as much as we want to and should have celebrations about Robert Burns, as a fan of Robert Burns, we should do that and be excited about that. We need to also tell the story of modern Scotland, and all of us have a responsibility to do that. Because we're all, I think we share something all in common right now, is we're all alive at this moment. We're not living back in the 1800s or 1700s. We're all, right now, 2021. And so we're in a position to tell the story that we want to tell. And we each have a role in doing that.
Yeah, I think it's quite poignant. You say that, as you know, we've just all lived through quite a strange year at a time that people are already talking about in generations to come. Schools will be studying this period in time, and what will they be saying? Well, as you say, the history that we all study now was present day for the people living it.
Yeah.
So it's about remembering that, okay, the past is important, but also celebrating what's going on now and pushing forward for the future.
Yeah, and I see as I go through again, I'm so grateful to have so many friends here on the call. I see David Alexander. I give a shout out to David Alexander so everyone knows that David, University of Glasgow graduate. He's a physicist. May not be David doing justice to what you graduated in or what your expertise is, but he ended up in the Bay Area, and now is at the Space Institute at Rice University, which is a top university for engineering and physics and And he's remained, as I understand it, David, still engaged with this growing sector in Scotland for space and the real potential that exists there. That is huge. And do people think of Scotland? Do they equate, if you come to someone up on the street and you say, tell me about Scotland, will space immediately come to mind? Well, Scotland has a great tradition of shipbuilding on the Clyde, as we all know. Let's modernize that. Let's, in honor of all those people who worked on the docks on the Clyde, in honor of all those people, let's move that forward into the space sector. Let's say these are ships that we're launching upward, but it's a new era that will show Scotland still has that innovation that existed during the shipbuilding, the glory years of the shipbuilding. Still exists. We didn't bury it. It's still there. So entrepreneurship and innovation exists. And David, I think, obviously will be a good spokesperson for that because he spent time on space issues. So I see David making a comment there. Anyway, if you want to connect with someone who knows about space, connect with David. So,
so that we've got almost come to the end of my questions, but I'd like to just allow, if anyone in the audience would like to ask anything, now is a good time. I have one question that came to me right at the beginning, and I'm not sure you can answer this, but because I think it's out of your hands, but in terms of the tourism, if we go back to that, when do you think Americans will be back in Scotland?
Well, Americans can make contributions. I don't know for sure when that will be, as you say, it's a difficult question, but if you wish to visit Scotland, visit it online. If you wish to make a contribution to the National Trust of Scotland, or environmental entities or entities that have really struggled as a result, the hospitality sector have struggled. If you're in the US, you want to visit Scotland and you're not able to do so, one of the important things that you could do is make a contribution to entities that are trying to preserve the heritage of Scotland. That's a very proactive thing that you can do. Just pull up a video and watch Visit Scotland videos and be inspired, and then go online and make a contribution. Find one thing I did, Lettie, was I found a pub in Fife that was struggling. I said, I'd like to buy a couple of things off of your menu, as if I were there.
Yeah.
So there are things that we can do if we truly have a love for Scotland. That the atmosphere that we are in with technology, we can make a difference with contributions or be proactive in making connections. But this year 2021 will afford travel for sure back and forth.
Yeah, we just have to.
And hello to Claire Alexander as well. I see that Claire is on. And so thank you, Claire, for everything that you do.
And Claire is based in Africa, so she's giving us a whole nother what's the word I'm looking for, view on life from that.
Yeah, Claire is a great example of a person who's making a difference. Scotland is not necessarily these nice little borders that we draw, back to the question of independence, etc. Scotland is a thing. Scotland is an idea. Scotland can live in the hearts of people wherever we are. So it's not necessarily a nicely drawn map of this is where the borders start and end. Claire is a good example of, as far as I'm concerned, Scotland with Claire is in South Africa, is in Africa. And me, I don't want to be presumptuous, but Scotland is here with me. So again, back to our roles and what we can do. We all have a role, but we also have a responsibility to take that idea of Scotland and keep it modern.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what we're doing at London Scottish House is, yes. We are Scotland in London, and keeping Scotland alive in London for the Scottish people in London, but visitors, and then also taking it globally as well. So I can completely relate to you there. We have got a question, but I think what I will do is send that to you separately, because we're almost out of time, and I just want to finish off with a couple of slightly more kind of upbeat and frivolous questions to end on a slightly less formal note. So who would you say inspires you?
Ooh, well, personally, professionally, my wife of 30 years is one of my great friends and inspirations, my partner, a genuine partner. So right off, that would be, and then on a personal level, my parents, my mom and dad, most definitely. Professionally, I have lots of great examples. I mentioned Senator Lugar, Tom Lantos, both were inspirations to me. I have writing interests, so I mentioned Burns. Robert Burns is a great inspiration. He was not perfect. He was imperfect in many ways, but so are we all not perfect and have our weaknesses. So Burns, an inspiration. So many women leaders who have been so important for me throughout my life, writers, cultural figures, political figures. And yeah, I appreciate that question. It's always good for me to just step back and think about that. But first and foremost, really, Jo Houston, who is a teacher of English here in the United States, she's my inspiration, unquestionably my greatest inspiration.
Well, I'd like to think that in 30 years, my husband will be saying the same thing about me. I can't say that's definitely going to happen, but
By the way, let me just say, I forgot to mention, as I think about the Global Scot Network in terms of individual responsibility, the Global Scot Network, just to give it a shout out to that network, alongside the Scottish Business Network and what the Scottish Business Network does. The Global Scot Network is fantastic, comprised of individuals who really are making a difference and want to contribute. What we need to do with the Global Scot Network is just give them opportunities to contribute and support what we're talking about here. I think they're ready and prepared to support, and it's a fantastic network of qualified people. So we just need to keep the Global Scot Network engaged.
Excellent. Two more questions for you. What book are you reading at the moment?
I was actually just reading a book of Burns poetry. History. He actually, we talk about his poems and songs, but I have a book that has many of his letters. And so I was reading his letters, which actually are nice because sometimes the poetry is, what is he going on about here? I'm not quite sure. But the letters are a little bit more of a window into the realities of the things that he was dealing with, writing to friends and political leaders. So that's what I was reading.
Wonderful. And finally, if you were trying to escape from from a house that was burning, apart from your wife and your dog, which we talked about before we started recording, what is the one thing that you would save from the flames?
Well, I would really, the most important thing that I could save is not necessarily a thing. It's a concept. And that no burning house could take away. And that's the spirit that existed within my home. My children are now grown and gone. So physically, there will be a point where we all vacate the home from which I'm actually speaking. But no one can take away the spirit that existed in this home. Whether fire or flame or earthquake or whatever, I will always have that with me. And that's what I will always take with me to my dying day.
That is a beautiful thing to say, and actually that makes me think of how I think of Scotland. I although I don't sound it, I grew up in Scotland, and so that will always be my home. I moved south 7 years ago, and I've always been called back to the rural Aberdeenshire village and where I was lucky enough to grow up. And it's, as you say, it's that feeling, that soul. And I think that that's exactly what we, as people who do appreciate Scotland for what it is, that we know what that is. So I think that's a really great thing to end on. So as I say, there was a question in the box that I will forward to you from Graham Kerr, but I think it needs a little bit of care and attention to reply to, and we don't have the time, unfortunately, at the moment. If anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to email me and I will forward them on to Ian and he will come back to you. You can connect with me and Ian on LinkedIn, and we look forward to connecting up with you again in the not too distant future. Thank you very much, Ian, for your time, and have a brilliant rest of your day.
Lovely. Thank you. Cheers to everyone. Take care.